Hey, today I'm going to be installing some of these 200-watt Renogy solar panels on these RAM ProMaster 1500s. The materials I'm going to be using are over here. I'll put descriptions and links in the comments section. I have some 10-gauge wire, some parallel connectors, some brackets from Renogy, butyl tape, a drill and some bits, and then all the hardware. I'll put the specifications for the hardware in the description. All right, here I am up on the roof. I always like to wipe things down, make sure you have a clean surface to work on. Before I start mounting the brackets or drilling holes, I always like to get both panels up on the roof and lay them out where I'd like them to go. I always mount these brackets offset at the front, middle, and at the rear. Later on in the video, you'll see what I mean by that. So I do 3 brackets per side per solar panel for a total of 3, 6, 9, 12 brackets per van. I always mount the panels with the cables at the front, towards the front of the van. That's just my personal preference. If your power bank's going to be towards the back of the van, you may want to mount them the opposite way. All right, I've got the panels laid face up with the cables exposed on the top. What I've done is I've marked the edges outside, outside, inside, inside, and what that means is these 2 sides are going to be facing the outside of the van, this side and that side, when the panels are flipped over, and the outside corners here are going to be facing the inside of the van. And the reason that's important is because on the outside of the van, the brackets can all be placed symmetrically, but on the inside of the van, as I showed you a moment ago, the brackets have to be staggered. These panels have pre-existing holes for hardware in some places, like the 4 corners, for example. However, if you're going to be using extra brackets like I do, in the center they have these holes which are just a little bit too small for my 1/4-inch hardware. So use an appropriate size bit, drill at the holes, and be careful not to go too deep and hit the solar cells underneath this coating. In order for the brackets on the inside edges to not be overlapping, they have to be offset. So the way I measure this out is this edge is 5.5 inches from the edge of the solar panel, and I want at least a 1-inch gap between the 2 brackets that are going to be sitting next to one another. So I measure out my first line at 5.5 inches. I add the inch gap, and then when I place this bracket here and I line up this edge right here with the 1-inch line, I put a dot where I want to drill my hole for the mounting hardware. All right, now I have all the brackets mounted. I'm going to get these panels up onto the roof, place them the right side up, and hopefully when I do that, you'll see what I'm talking about with mounting these inside brackets offset. One thing I want to mention at this point is that when mounting these brackets right here, if you're not paying attention, it's easy to mount them this way. It won't attach to the roof like that. So before you tighten all this hardware down, just make sure that brackets are mounted properly, otherwise they won't fit on the roof. One other thing is that all of the hardware that I use to mount these brackets to the solar panels come with the brackets themselves, and the hardware that I'm going to be using to mount the solar panels and brackets to the van roof itself is just 1/4-inch nuts and bolts with washers and locking washers that you can get from Lowe's or Home Depot or wherever. I'm back on the roof with the panels in place. Everything is all nice and straight. You can see the brackets are all offset nicely all the way up the center. What I'm going to do now is go around and with a Sharpie, I'm just going to mark out all of the holes so that when I pull the panels off, I can drill through the roof. When I drill out these holes for the mounting hardware, I'm also going to drill a hole here using a hole saw so that I can put a grommet and run these cables all through to the inside from both this panel and the one right here. I like putting the hole on the elevated part of the ridge. This is going to be underneath the panel, so it'll be protected from water coming directly on it. But since it's also on the elevated part of the ridge, if it rains, water is going to move through these channels, and it's less likely to cause leaking if you're on the top part. Now all my holes are drilled out, and I always bring a shop vac up here with me because when you drill through the roof, you get these little metal shavings. They're just terrible things that stick and rust, and they get all over everything. So as soon as I'm done cutting this metal or drilling into this metal, I like to tidy up and just get rid of everything so that it doesn't cause a headache later on. I've gone around and put butyl tape over all of the holes that I drilled in the roof. The idea is that you cut little strips, place it over these holes, mount the brackets on top, and when you push the hardware through the holes, through the butyl tape, that butyl tape forms a seal and prevents any water from leaking in from the roof. The next step is to get one of the panels in place and line up the holes in your roof with the holes in the brackets. And then if everything's drilled out properly, you should be able to push your hardware through the holes without much resistance. Sometimes you might need a hammer to sort of help them go through. This is a two-person job. Once you get the bolt and the washer on the top, you've got to go underneath, put the locking washer on, put the nut and tighten everything up. You can see here that the butyl tape, when this tightens down, sort of squeezes out and forms a really nice seal around that. That's the only opening into the van other than the hole that the cables are going to pass through. But if you put the butyl tape down, tighten it down nicely, this forms a nice seal, and then put some some silicone or caulk on the inside, then absolutely no water or moisture is going to get through this. This next part's a little bit tricky, but it's not too bad. So the grommets usually come a little bit larger than the hole size you want to drill. So what I always do is I cut enough of it out so that it fits perfectly, and you want to pre-measure that in the hole. Then I take all the cables, pass them through the hole in the roof, then wrap the grommet around all the cables like that. And then you want to just fit that in place. And if you've cut the grommet to the right size, there should be no problem forming a really nice tight fit around the hole you've cut in the roof. So this will take some minor adjustment, but as you can see there, this is what you're going to end up with. A grommet around the hole you've cut in the roof, and then all the cables are now inside of the van. I've propped this panel up with this piece of cardboard while I'm doing this, and the idea now is to remove this, lower this down, such that the holes in these brackets align with the holes you've cut in the roof. And as you pass this down, you want to put some sealant over the top, and then we're going to seal it up again in the bottom. So I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. Here's what it looks like after the sealant's applied. I'm going to take this piece of cardboard out, and if you got somebody who's inside, you can put a little bit of tension on the cables from the inside and just sort of pull them through. And you can line this up with your holes, keep these cables, I put them between the two. And that's it for that part. Then all you got to do is, just like the other ones, push your hardware through, secure them down, then go on the inside and seal that grommet hole up from the inside. Here's a view of the mounting hardware and the cables coming in from the inside of the van. Hardware looks great, just like you want it to look. This looks a bit sloppy, but that's okay. When this dries up, I'm going to take this all off and then reapply a bunch of sealant around this grommet, but this should do just fine. It's completely covered from the outside. Can't see any daylight through there, so that's great. Over on the edges here, there's a little bit less coming through. You could probably even get away with doing the 1 inches here. The 3/4 inch might be a little too tight. I mean, it works fine, but yeah, you could get away with going a bit longer. All right, we're almost done. This is what 400 watts of solar looks like on the roof of a ProMaster 1500. Everything looks good. Hardware is all tight. Everything went pretty much according to plan. I'm going to go back around after this and put some sealant over top of these bolts just to make extra sure that no water is going to get in, but I think it would even be fine as it is. Typically what I do is I test these panels out by hooking up the parallel connectors and the 10 gauge wire and putting it into whatever I'm going to be using for my power source. In this case, I'll be using Goal Zero Yeti systems. I don't have those from Yeti yet, so I just went ahead and installed these. I'm going to test them when I get the Yetis in later this week. I've installed a bunch of these Renogy 200 watt solar panels. I've never had any problems, so I don't anticipate that they're not going to work. But before you guys do this, if you can, it's a good idea to hook everything up and make sure your solar is working before you bolt everything into the roof, because if one of these panels isn't working, if they're defective for whatever reason, then I've got to remove everything and replace a panel, which is not going to be fun. It's going to take hours. This is a view from the ground. As you can see, they have a really nice low profile up on the top. You wouldn't even really be able to see them if you weren't looking for them, if you didn't know they were there. All right, here's what I was talking about. I have the two negative leads come in from the solar panels. The 2 positive leads, they go into these parallel connectors, which I've then connected to this 10 gauge cable. Cable runs down this pillar, pops out underneath here, underneath this bench, runs into this connector, and then the connector is attached to this Goal Zero Yeti system. And you can see that I'm getting 321 watts in right now from the 400 watts worth of panels, which is a fairly decent input. Oh, you can see the clouds just moved over the sun, so it's moving around a little bit. That happens. So that's it. If you guys have any questions, leave them in the comments section. I'll do my best to get back to you. Otherwise, good luck.